Jennifer pressed her palm against the cold kitchen window, her breath fogging the glass. 5 sleepless nights. 5 days of searching. 5 days since Daniel vanished. The German shepherd sat motionless on their front lawn, staring directly at her with amber eyes that seemed to carry a message she couldn't yet understand. This was the 3rd morning it had appeared. Always at dawn. Always watching. Always waiting. Robert's hands trembled against her shoulders, his grip alternating between crushing pressure and barely their contact, as if his body couldn't decide whether to hold her steady or collapse. The dog's ears stood erect, tracking her every movement. Then it rose, turned with precise calculation, and walked toward the dense pine forest that had swallowed her son whole. Why would a dog appear 3 mornings in a row, staring at their window, then walk deliberately toward the exact forest where Daniel disappeared? What did it know that the search teams didn't? Their home sat at the edge of Pinecrest Valley, where civilization ended and the Appalachian wilderness began. Thousands of acres where search parties had found nothing but silence. Jennifer's hand moved toward her coffee mug, stopped halfway, dropped to her side. She'd forgotten how to complete simple actions. She inhaled. He exhaled. They'd stopped syncing their breathing 3 days ago, each locked in separate rhythms of panic. Daniel's Spider-Man lunchbox still sat on the counter, where he'd left it Tuesday morning, his half-eaten granola bar hardening inside. At Bond's Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another Bond speaks louder than words. The German shepherd barked once. The sound was sharp, deliberate, cutting through the quiet morning air like a demand. Jennifer flinched. The dog barked 3 times. Jennifer's mother had told her once that 3 barks meant warning in old mountain folklore. But this felt different. This felt like instruction. It paced 3 steps toward the forest, then turned back, fixing them with that penetrating stare that made her skin prickle with something between hope and dread. Robert moved to the window, beside her. "That's the same dog," he said, his voice rough from shouting Daniel's name across miles of empty trails. "It's been here every morning since he disappeared." Jennifer nodded slowly, unable to look away from the animal. Stray dogs beg. They cower. They search for food. This dog sat with military posture, executing a ritual. The dog knew something. She was certain of it with conviction that bypassed logic and settled deep in her gut. "We need to follow it," she said, already moving toward the door. Robert caught her arm. "Jennifer, we can't just wander into the forest because a stray dog is barking at us." His words were reasonable, grounded in sanity and caution. But reason had failed them. Sanity had offered no solutions. Their son was somewhere out there, and this dog appeared each morning with the same ritual, the same purposeful presence. What else do we have? They're reducing the search teams today. The sheriff thinks he wandered too far, that he's probably... Her voice broke. The word gone stayed trapped in her throat where she kept it caged for 5 days. Robert's face crumpled. The pain that flashed across his features was so raw, so visceral, that she almost looked away. But she didn't. They had to face this together, had to make impossible decisions together. "If there's even the smallest chance," she continued, "even the most ridiculous, desperate chance that this dog knows something, can we really afford to ignore it?" The German shepherd barked again, more urgently this time. It was pacing now, moving back and forth at the forest's edge, its agitation growing visible. Its tail moved in 3 measured sweeps left center right, before standing erect in alert position. Robert looked from his wife to the dog and back again. He saw the determination hardening in Jennifer's eyes, the maternal instinct that would burn down the world to find their child. He had felt that same fire consuming him from the inside for 5 days straight. "Okay," he said quietly. "We follow it." They grabbed their jackets, their phones, a flashlight even though the sun was rising. Jennifer's hand shook as she laced her hiking boots. Robert checked his phone one last time. Nothing. They stepped off the porch. The German shepherd stopped pacing, watching them descend the steps, then turned and walked, not running, not rushing, walking with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The dog moved with confidence, picking its way through their yard toward the opening in the fence where the wilderness began. It didn't run or rush. Its pace was measured, allowing him to keep up, but never slow enough to suggest it might stop. Jennifer and Robert followed, their footsteps crunching over pine needles and fallen branches. The sounds of their neighborhood faded quickly, swallowed by the vast silence of the forest. Bird calls echoed from the canopy above. Somewhere in the distance, a creek tumbled over rocks. The German shepherd led them deeper into trees, along paths that didn't appear on any map, through terrain that felt both foreign and ancient. Every 50 yards or so, the dog would pause, turn its head to ensure they were still behind it, and then continue forward with that same unwavering purpose. Jennifer's heart hammered in her chest. With each step, hope and terror waged war inside her. What would they find at the end of this strange journey? Was their son waiting somewhere ahead, or was this just a desperate delusion of parents who couldn't accept the unacceptable? The German shepherd walked on, and they followed, because what else could they do? Their son was out there somewhere, and this mysterious animal was the only guide they had left. Tuesday, September 26th. The last morning Jennifer would ever describe as ordinary. The thermometer read 52 degrees. Jennifer's breath made small clouds when she stepped outside to grab the newspaper. Daniel had bounded downstairs for breakfast, wearing his favorite superhero shirt, the blue one with a faded emblem from too many washes. Jennifer had made pancakes, and Robert had already left for his shift at the lumber mill. Daniel talked excitedly about the fort he was building in the backyard, an elaborate construction of fallen branches and old blankets that had consumed his attention for the past week. He shoveled bites of pancake between descriptions of secret passages and lookout towers. Jennifer nodded at Daniel's fort descriptions while scanning her phone calendar. Conference call, 10 a.m. Groceries by 3. Her thumb hovered over the accept meeting button. In 3 hours, she would stand in this exact spot screaming Daniel's name until her voice gave out. But first, she had a conference call. After breakfast, Daniel grabbed his soccer ball and raced outside. Jennifer watched from the kitchen window as he dribbled across the grass, taking shots at the makeshift goal Robert had built against the fence. The backyard extended about 40 yards before meeting the tree line, where their property ended and the national forest began. They had always been careful about the forest, teaching Daniel that the trees marked a boundary he shouldn't cross without an adult. He had been good about following that rule, mostly. At 8 years old, he understood that the wilderness wasn't a playground, that people could get lost in those endless woods and never find their way home. Jennifer loaded the dishwasher. Conference call in 20 minutes. She closed her office door, logged in, listened to budget debates that would mean nothing by noon. The discussion dragged on longer than expected, a tedious debate about budget allocations and projected growth metrics. She found her attention drifting, watching the clock tick past 11, then 11:30. When the call finally ended at 11:45, Jennifer stretched and walked back to the kitchen. She glanced out the window, expecting to see Daniel still playing. The backyard was empty. Jennifer's coffee mug slipped from her hand, hit the counter, splashed across her notes. The soccer ball sat motionless in the middle of the lawn. A flutter of unease stirred in her chest, but she pushed it down. He was probably inside already, watching television or grabbing a snack. "Daniel," she called out, walking through the downstairs rooms. Silence answered her. She checked the living room, the bathroom, his bedroom upstairs. Empty. Her throat closed. She swallowed 3 times before she could call his name. Jennifer went back outside, crossing the yard quickly. "Daniel." Her voice sounded too loud, too sharp. No response came back. She reached the fence line and noticed immediately that the gate was hanging open, swinging slightly in the breeze. The gate swung slightly in the breeze, its hinges making the small metallic squeak Daniel always imitated when he played spy games. The sound that used to make her laugh now made her stomach drop. They always kept that gate latched. Always. Daniel knew that rule as well as he knew his own name. Jennifer's heart began to pound harder. She pushed through the gate, scanning the edge of the forest. "Daniel, this isn't funny. Come here right now." Still nothing. Only the whisper of wind through pine branches and the distant call of a crow. She called Robert. 2 rings. Hey, what's... Daniel's gone. Gates open. I can't find him. Silence. Then, I'm leaving right now. Call the sheriff. 15 minutes. The line went dead. Jennifer's fingers trembled as she dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm, professional voice asked questions that felt surreal. Yes, her son was missing. Yes, she had checked the house. Yes, she believed he might have wandered into the forest. Officers were on their way. The next hours blurred into a nightmare of frantic activity. Robert arrived home with tires screeching. Together they searched the forest's edge, calling Daniel's name until their voices went hoarse. Sheriff Morrison arrived with 2 deputies and immediately organized a search pattern. More volunteers appeared, neighbors and strangers alike, spreading out through the trees in careful grid formations. Search and rescue teams deployed tracking dogs that picked up Daniel scent near the open gate and followed it into the forest for roughly half a mile before losing it completely at a rocky creek bed. The tracking dogs followed Daniel's scent for half a mile into the forest. Then they stopped at a rocky creek bed, circling and whining. The lead handler said he'd never seen dogs lose a scent so completely at water, not unless something had carried the child. Sunset. Floodlights appeared. Generator engines roared to life. Someone handed Jennifer a jacket. Someone else brought coffee she couldn't taste. Jennifer refused to go inside, standing vigil at the tree line even as the temperature dropped and darkness swallowed the forest whole. Robert brought her a jacket, wrapped his arms around her, and they stood together in silence because there were no words adequate for what they were feeling. Search teams continued through the night, their flashlight beams cutting through the blackness like desperate prayers. By morning, Daniel had been missing for 18 hours, and Jennifer felt something fundamental break inside her chest. She could go inside, sleep, let them search, or she could stand here until they found him, or she collapsed. There was no decision. She stayed. The days that followed became an endurance test of hope against despair. News vans arrived, setting up camp at the end of their driveway. Reporters asked questions that Jennifer answered mechanically, holding Daniel's school photo up to cameras, begging whoever was watching to help find her son. The search area expanded daily. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging flew low over the canopy. Volunteers combed through increasingly remote sections of wilderness. But the forest, vast and indifferent, revealed nothing. Third morning, Jennifer found Robert at the kitchen window, his silhouette motionless in the pre-dawn gray. She wrapped her robe tighter around herself and moved to stand beside him, following his gaze out to the yard. That was when she saw it for the first time. A German shepherd sat on their front lawn, positioned directly in line with the window, completely motionless except for the slight twitch of its ears, catching sounds they could not hear. German shepherd, large and powerful with a tan and black coat, distinctive saddle markings across its back. It sat with the rigid stillness of soldier at attention, not a muscle twitching, except its ears tracking sounds they couldn't hear. How long has it been there? Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert shook his head, without looking away from the animal. I came down 20 minutes ago, and it was already sitting exactly like that, just watching the house. Jennifer felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. Strays beg or run. This dog waited like it had been trained for a specific mission and was executing orders. Robert reached for the doorknob. The German shepherd stood, maintained eye contact for 5 seconds, turned, walked toward the forest with measured steps. At the tree line, it paused, looked back, disappeared into shadow. The entire interaction had lasted perhaps 3 minutes, but it left Jennifer with a feeling she could not name, something hovering between curiosity and unease. That was strange, Robert said, his hand falling away from the door. Jennifer nodded, unable to shake the image of those intelligent eyes fixed on their home. They spent the rest of that day with the search teams, hiking through terrain that grew increasingly rugged and remote. Sheriff Morrison had expanded the search radius to 5 miles from their property, though he admitted privately that most lost children were found within the first 48 hours or not at all. Jennifer refused to accept that timeline. Daniel was out there somewhere. She could feel it with a certainty that defied logic. He was alive and waiting for them to find him. The fourth morning brought the German shepherd back. Jennifer saw it first, waking earlier than Robert after another sleepless night punctuated by dreams of her son calling her name from somewhere just out of reach. She walked to the kitchen window with her coffee, and there it was again, sitting in the exact same spot as the previous morning, positioned with that same unnerving precision. The dog's head lifted slightly as she appeared at the window, acknowledging her presence with what almost seemed like recognition. Jennifer's heart began to beat faster. This was not coincidence. This animal was coming here deliberately, day after day, at the same early hour. She grabbed her phone and started recording, wanting evidence of this strange visitation. The German shepherd sat perfectly still for nearly a minute, its gaze never wavering from the window. Then it barked 3 times. Each bark was clear, sharp, and spaced exactly the same distance apart, like a signal or code. Goosebumps rose on Jennifer's arms. She moved toward the door before her conscious mind registered the decision. The dog stood, walked several paces toward the forest, then stopped and looked back at her. The message felt unmistakable, even though Jennifer could not explain how she understood it. The dog wanted her to follow. It was trying to communicate something urgent, something important. Robert came downstairs to find Jennifer already pulling on her hiking boots. "It's back," she said, gesturing toward the window. "The same dog. It keeps coming back, and it's trying to tell us something." Robert looked at his wife with concern etched across his features. The stress of the past 4 days had taken a visible toll on both of them, dark circles under their eyes, weight already dropping from faces grown gaunt with worry. He worried that grief might be causing Jennifer to see patterns where none existed, to assign meaning to random animal behavior because the alternative, accepting their helplessness, was too painful to bear. "It's just a stray dog." Robert's voice carried that careful tone he used when he thought she was breaking. Stray dogs don't keep schedules. Jennifer showed him the video. 3 barks, perfect intervals, deliberate walk toward forest, backward glance. "That's not random, Robert." His skepticism wavered. She saw in the way his jaw unclenched slightly. The behavior did seem unusual. He had to admit that much. But following a stray dog into the wilderness while their son was missing felt like the desperate action of people losing their grip on reality. They stood 3 feet apart, Jennifer with her boots half-laced, Robert with his phone in his hand, ready to call the search coordinator. Neither moved for 10 seconds. Then Robert set down his phone. "Okay, but not today. If it comes back tomorrow, we follow it together." The conversation ended without resolution, both of them too exhausted and emotionally raw to push their positions harder. It didn't come back that day, but they both stood at the window the next morning before dawn, waiting. That night, Jennifer found Daniel's research project on the kitchen table. My Family Tree by Daniel Mitchell. He'd traced her maiden name, Brennan, back 3 generations. She'd never looked further than that. Now she wondered if she should have. On her phone screen, the dog's eyes caught the dawn light, reflecting amber like polished stone. She played it 3 times, watching those eyes track the camera lens as if the animal knew it was being recorded. 5th morning, Jennifer reached the kitchen window at 6:12 a.m. Shadow materialized from the fog at 6:15. The dog had appeared at precisely the same time as the previous 2 mornings, sitting in its customary position, looking directly at the house with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight through walls and into her desperate heart. Jennifer's coffee mug tilted in her hand, spilling across her fingers. She didn't flinch at the heat. This was no longer coincidence or chance. This was a pattern, deliberate and unmistakable. She watched as the dog performed its ritual once more. 3 sharp barks that cut through the morning silence. A purposeful walk toward the tree line. A pause. A backward glance toward the window where Jennifer stood frozen, her pulse quickening with each passing second. The German shepherd waited there at the forest's edge, its form half swallowed by fog, patient and expectant. Jennifer made her decision in that moment. A decision born not from logic, but from a primal instinct every parent carries. The instinct that would walk through fire or into darkness if there existed even the smallest chance of bringing their child home. She set down the coffee, pulled on jacket, boots, grabbed phone, flashlight, pepper spray. Wrote note to Robert. Following the dog. Had to. Love you. Propped it against a coffee maker. Then she stepped out into fog-drenched morning, the cold air biting at her cheeks and nose. Jennifer across the lawn, 20 feet from the dog. 15. 10. The German shepherd didn't move until she reached 8 feet, then turned and walked into forest without looking back to see if she followed. Its coat was indeed well-maintained, the fur thick and healthy, with a distinctive tan and black saddle pattern typical of working German shepherds. This was not a starving stray or abandoned pet. This dog belonged to someone, was cared for by someone. Yet it appeared here each morning with the same urgent message. When Jennifer reached a distance of about 10 feet, the German shepherd turned and began walking into the forest without hesitation, as though it had been waiting for her to make exactly this choice. Jennifer followed. Fog muffled her footsteps on pine needles. The dog's tan markings appeared and disappeared in the gray, a beacon flickering between invisible and clear. The dog moved with confidence along paths that were barely visible, winding between massive pine trunks and through dense undergrowth that caught at Jennifer's clothing. The fog made everything feel dreamlike and surreal, muffling sounds and limiting visibility to perhaps 20 feet in any direction. She kept her eyes locked on the tan markings of the dog's coat, afraid that if she looked away for even a moment, the animal would vanish and she would find herself lost and alone in this vast wilderness that had already claimed her son. They walked. Jennifer's phone showed 6:32 when they started, 6:47 when the terrain began climbing. Her fitness tracker logged 0.8 miles. The German shepherd maintained a steady pace, never rushing but never slowing, occasionally pausing to ensure Jennifer was still following before continuing onward. The terrain grew steeper, climbing upward along what might have once been a game trail, but now was barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest floor. Jennifer's breath came harder with the exertion and altitude, her legs burning as they navigated fallen logs and rocky outcroppings slick with morning dew. She had no idea where they were going, but the dog seemed to know exactly, moving with unwavering purpose toward some destination Jennifer could only imagine. Behind them, back at the house, Robert woke to find Jennifer's side of the bed empty and cold. He called her name once, then twice, the silence that answered him filling the space with immediate dread. He stumbled downstairs still half asleep and found the note propped against the coffee maker. Robert found the note at 6:51. His shout, "Jennifer," echoed through the empty house. He read it twice, swore, grabbed his jacket, called Morrison while running across the lawn. "Sheriff, my wife just went into forest alone following that damn dog. I'm going after her. Send everyone." Fear and anger warred inside him. Fear for his wife now wandering alone in the same forest that had taken their son. Anger that she had made this reckless decision without discussing it with him first. He grabbed his own jacket and boots, shoving his feet into them without bothering to tie the laces properly. His phone showed 6:43 in the morning. Jennifer had maybe a 20 or 30-minute head start, but in the fog and unfamiliar terrain, she could have gone in any direction. Robert burst out the back door and ran across the lawn toward the gate, the same gate that had been standing open the day Daniel disappeared. The fog had begun to lift slightly as the sun climbed higher, but visibility remained poor. He cupped his hand around his mouth and shouted Jennifer's name into forest, the sound seeming to die almost immediately in the thick air, absorbed by countless trees and the vast and different wilderness beyond. No answer came back. Robert stood at the threshold between his property and the forest, paralyzed by indecision. Should he follow blindly, potentially getting lost himself? Should he call Sheriff Morrison and organize a search party, wasting precious time but ensuring a coordinated effort? Robert's hand shook so badly he nearly dropped the phone. He hadn't told Jennifer, but yesterday the sheriff had asked him to consider declaring Daniel legally missing. The paperwork sat in his truck. He'd planned to burn it. 30 seconds of indecision. Then Robert stepped into forest, phone against his ear, already moving in the direction he'd seen the dog take every morning. If Jennifer was out there chasing after that dog, he would find her. He would bring both his wife and his son home, or he would die trying. How far ahead was Jennifer? How fast could she move through terrain she'd never seen? How quickly could a desperate mother disappear into wilderness that had already taken her son? She glanced back at the house once before entering the forest. Daniel's bedroom window stared down at her, dark and empty. She turned toward the trees and didn't look back again. Jennifer pushed through mountain laurel. Branches scraped her jacket, left thin red lines across her hands. The German shepherd moved ahead with practiced ease, slipping between obstacles that Jennifer had to force her way through, always maintaining that same measured distance of about 15 feet ahead. The fog had begun to burn off as the morning sun climbed higher, revealing the true depth and scale of the wilderness they were entering. Massive old-growth pines towered overhead, their trunks so wide that 3 people holding hands could not encircle them. The forest floor, 3 inches of pine needles over moss over granite. Boulders the size of cars, lichen covering them in paisley patterns of gray and green. The air grew cooler as they climbed, carrying the sharp scent of pine resin and damp earth. Jennifer could hear water running somewhere nearby, a creek tumbling over rocks in its endless journey downward. Phone signal, gone at 6:55. Battery, 72%. Worthless. She tried not to think about how far they had come from the house, how completely lost she would be if the German shepherd suddenly vanished. Instead, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on maintaining the pace the dog set, on the fragile hope that this strange journey would somehow lead her to Daniel. The German shepherd stopped at a ridge crest. Saturday. Waited. Jennifer climbed the final 50 feet, her lungs burning, legs shaking. Reached the top, straightened, forgot to breathe. They stood on a high point overlooking a valley that seemed untouched by human presence. Forest, unbroken green stretching to mountains 30 miles distant. No roads, no clearings, no power lines, nowhere to hide a lost child except everywhere. Jennifer felt suddenly and profoundly small, a tiny figure in a landscape so enormous that it made her problems seem insignificant by comparison. Jennifer's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed a tree trunk, steadied herself. The German shepherd stood, began descending. Jennifer followed because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant Daniel was gone. The descent proved even more challenging than the climb, the steep slope forcing her to move sideways and grab onto trees for support to avoid tumbling headlong down the mountainside. The German shepherd navigated the terrain with the confidence of an animal that had traveled this route many times before, never hesitating or showing uncertainty about which direction to take. They reached the valley floor after what felt like an hour of careful descent. Jennifer's calves screaming in protest with every step. The character of the forest changed down here. The trees grew closer together, their branches forming a thick canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight and created a perpetual twilight atmosphere. Ferns grew waist-high in places, their fronds brushing against Jennifer as she pushed through them. The sound of running water grew louder, and soon they emerged onto the bank of a wide creek with water, so clear that Jennifer could see smooth river stones covering the bottom. The creek ran clear over smooth stones. The German shepherd walked straight in, water reaching its shoulders. Jennifer followed. Icy water hit her boots, soaked through to her socks in seconds. Gasped, kept moving, crossed to the far bank with feet already going numb. On the far bank, Jennifer noticed carved marks on a cedar tree, not animal scratches. Deliberate cuts forming a symbol, 3 vertical lines crossed by 1 horizontal. She'd seen that pattern before, where, on the far side of the creek, the dog paused to shake water from its coat, droplets flying in all directions and catching the filtered sunlight like tiny diamonds. Then it continued onward, leading Jennifer along the creek bank for another quarter mile before turning sharply away from the water and heading up a small rise covered in thick undergrowth. Jennifer's wet clothes clung to her skin, making her shiver despite the physical exertion of hiking. She wrapped her arms around herself and kept moving, driven by a determination that bordered on obsession. The dog had brought her this far. It had to be leading her somewhere specific, somewhere important. She could not allow herself to consider any alternative. Back at the house, Sheriff Morrison arrived to find Robert pacing frantically in the front yard. Phone pressed his ear as he left Jennifer yet another voicemail message begging her to call him back. The sheriff was a man in his late 50s with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades working outdoors. He listened as Robert explained the situation, his expression growing increasingly concerned with each detail. A mysterious dog appearing every morning. Jennifer following alone into forest. No contact for over an hour now. My wife followed the dog into the forest. Robert's voice cracked over the phone. Morrison was already grabbing his keys. When? Hour ago. Maybe more. Bloodhounds. Already called them. I'm 10 minutes out. Don't go in alone until we. I'm already in. Mile deep at least. Morrison assembled 12 volunteers. 3 deputies, 2 bloodhounds. The dogs picked up Jennifer's scent at the back gate within 90 seconds. Started baying. Pulled toward the forest with enough force their handlers had to lean back. Morrison keyed his radio. All units, we have the trail. Move out. Wind hit the ridgetop, carrying the scent of cedar and something else. Wood smoke. Faint but distinct. Someone had a fire burning somewhere in that vast emptiness. The German shepherd stopped. Jennifer climbed the rise. Saw it. A cabin, half collapsed, strangled by vines, nearly invisible. But there, unmistakably there. She had been following the dog for over an hour when it stopped abruptly at the top of a small rise, its posture shifting from purposeful movement to complete stillness. Jennifer climbed the final few feet to stand beside the animal, breathing hard from the exertion. What she saw made her freeze in place, her exhausted mind struggling to process the scene before her. Nestled in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest, stood the remnants of an old structure, half collapsed and nearly invisible beneath decades of encroaching vegetation. Log walls, collapsed roof on the west side, single window, glass long gone, door hanging on rusted hinges at a 30-degree angle. This had once been a cabin, someone's home in this remote wilderness. The German shepherd moved forward slowly, approaching the structure with caution. Jennifer followed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The cabin looked ancient, abandoned for years if not decades. Wooden boards gray with age formed the walls, many of them rotting, and split from exposure to countless winters. The single visible window was just an empty frame, the glass long since broken and carried away by time. The front door hung at an angle on rusted hinges, creating a dark opening that led into the interior. Jennifer pulled the flashlight from her pocket, clicked it on, directed the beam through the doorway, stepped over the threshold, tested each floorboard. Dust covered everything except fresh disturbance marks. The interior was surprisingly intact despite the collapsed roof section. Dust covered everything in a thick layer, disturbed only by animal tracks that crisscrossed the floor. Iron wood stove, wooden table, 3 legs intact, 4th broken, shelves with corroded tin cans. And in the corner, color, bright red against gray decay. Jennifer stepped carefully over the threshold, testing each floorboard before putting her full weight on it. The German shepherd entered behind her, moving directly toward the far corner of the cabin where shadows gathered thickest. Jennifer followed the dog with her flashlight beam, illuminating the corner piece by piece. Her breath caught in her throat when the light revealed a small splash of bright color against the gray and brown decay. Daniel's hat, red with white stripes. She knew that hat. She had bought it for Daniel last winter at the outdoor store in town. He had worn it constantly during the cold months, refusing to take it off even indoors because he loved the way the stripes matched his favorite jacket. This was Daniel's hat. Her son had been in this cabin. She grabbed the hat. Daniel's shampoo scent hit her like a physical blow. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the wall, pressed the fabric to her face, and let 30 seconds of silent shaking pass before forcing herself upright. The hat still held warmth, or maybe that was Jennifer's imagination, but the scent was real. Her son had worn this. Recently, the German shepherd paced near the wood stove, whining softly. Jennifer wiped her eyes and forced herself to think clearly, to search the cabin more thoroughly for additional clues. Footprints in the dust. Small, Daniel's size, leading from door to corner to door. He'd been here. Left. Where? The prints led from the door to the corner and then back out again, suggesting he had entered, spent some time here, and then left. Jennifer checked the shelves and found nothing useful, just old debris and evidence of mice or other small creatures that had made the cabin their home over the years. Then she noticed something else, a small wooden frame propped against the wall near the collapsed section of roof. She picked it up carefully, brushing away dust and cobwebs to reveal a black and white photograph protected behind cracked glass. The image showed a man standing in front of this very cabin, or rather the cabin as it had looked decades earlier when it was new and well-maintained. The man was tall and lean, wearing work clothes typical of the mid-20th century. His face held a serious expression, but his eyes had a kindness to them that came through even in the faded photograph. Something about his features struck Jennifer as familiar, though she could not immediately place why. She turned the frame over and pried open the back, removing the photograph to check if anything was written on the reverse side. Faded pencil marks spelled out a name and date. Theodore Brennan, 1948. Jennifer's heart skipped. Brennan was her maiden name. She studied the photograph more closely, comparing the man's features to her own memories of family photos. The resemblance was there in the shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes. This man was family, someone from her bloodline who had lived in this remote cabin more than 70 years ago. The dog barked once, moved to the door. Jennifer pocketed the hat and photo, followed. Outside, the dog circled the cabin slowly, nose to ground, searching. Stopped behind the collapsed section. Saturday. Looked at Jennifer. Looked at the base of a cedar tree. Looked at Jennifer again. Jennifer knelt at the cedar's base. Saw it immediately. Silver wrapper. Granola bar, the brand she packed in Daniel's lunch daily. Fresh. Colors bright. Torn open by small fingers. Days old at most. Jennifer turned the wrapper over in her hands. Fresh. Edges crisp. Colors vibrant. This wasn't weathered. Daniel had been here within days, maybe hours. Jennifer's chest tightened. She stood too fast. Black spots bloomed at the edges of her vision. She braced against the tree until they cleared. Fresh footprints near the tree. Small, leading away from the cabin deeper into forest. Still following her son. Still getting closer. Jennifer checked her phone. Still no signal. Battery, 61%. Time, 8:47 a.m. She'd been walking 3.5 hours. Turn back. Get help. Return with the sheriff and search teams. That was rational. Jennifer looked at the footprints leading deeper into forest. Looked at the wrapper in her hand. Put it in her pocket. Followed the dog. What if Daniel was just 1 mile ahead? What if that mile was the difference between finding him alive and finding him too late? Water bottle empty. Stomach growling. Head beginning to ache. Jennifer ignored all of it. Kept moving. The German shepherd led her through increasingly dense vegetation, under fallen logs and around massive boulders that looked like they had tumbled down from the mountains in some ancient avalanche. The footprints remained visible in soft patches of earth, confirming they were still on Daniel's trail. Meanwhile, the search party led by Sheriff Morrison had made significant progress tracking Jennifer's route through the forest. The bloodhounds pulled Morrison's team up the ridge. Robert stayed close to the lead handler, ignoring burning lungs and shaking legs. Deputy Chin marked trees with fluorescent tape every 50 yards. Robert pushed himself to stay near the front of the group, ignoring the burning in his lungs and the protests of muscles and used to this kind of sustained physical exertion. Deputy Marcus Chin walked beside him, occasionally reaching out to steady Robert when the terrain grew particularly treacherous. The deputy was young, maybe 25, with the lean build of someone who spent his free time hiking these very mountains. "We're gaining on her," Chin said encouragingly. "The dogs are moving faster now, which means the scent is getting stronger." Robert nodded but did not reply, saving his breath for climb. His mind churned with worry and anger and fear all mixed together in a toxic combination that made clear thinking nearly impossible. What had Jennifer been thinking, going off alone like this? What if she got hurt? What if they had 2 missing family members instead of 1? But beneath the anger, Robert understood exactly what had driven his wife into the forest. He would have done the same thing if their positions were reversed. The need to find Daniel overrode every other consideration, every rational objection, every safety concern. The group reached the ridge crest and paused briefly to catch their breath. Sheriff Morrison used a vantage point to scan the valley below with binoculars, searching for any sign of Jennifer or unusual activity in the wilderness. He saw nothing but endless forest stretching toward distant mountains. One of the volunteers, an older man named Frank who had lived in Pinecrest Valley his entire life, stepped up beside the sheriff and pointed toward a specific section of the valley. "There's an old homestead down there." Frank pointed into the valley. "Built in the 40s. Hermit lived there for years. Been abandoned since I was a kid." Morrison lowered his binoculars. "You can find it?" "Probably. Lead the way." Morrison radioed ahead. "All units. Possible destination identified. Abandoned cabin in valley below. Increasing pace." The team began descending, moving faster now with a target in mind. Robert checked his watch. 9:15. Jennifer had been alone in the forest for 3 hours. 3 hours was too long. 3 hours meant hypothermia, injury, disorientation. He pushed harder, ignoring the deputy's warning to maintain pace. Jennifer's legs shook with each step. Her vision narrowed at the edges. She'd read once that the body can push beyond exhaustion if the mind demands it. She was testing that theory now. The forest changed. Undergrowth less dense. Carved marks on trees. Deliberate, old but maintained. Someone lived here. Someone created paths. The German shepherd's pace increased. No more checking back. Straight line towards something specific. Sound first. Water rushing over stones. Then sight. Wide river, gray stones, white rapids. Noise drowning everything else. The German shepherd stopped at the bank. Looked upstream. Barked twice. Began walking. Jennifer pushed through a final wall of ferns and emerged onto the bank of a wide river that rushed over a bed of smooth stones, creating a constant roar that filled the air and made all other sounds disappear. The German shepherd stood at the water's edge, looking upstream toward a point where the river bent around a large outcropping of gray stone. The dog barked twice, then began walking along the riverbank in that direction. Jennifer followed, her boots crunching over the rocky shore, her eyes scanning both the water and the opposite bank for any sign of her son. As they rounded the stone outcropping, Jennifer saw something that made her stop abruptly. 50 yards upstream, rope bridge, thick ropes, wooden planks, swaying in breeze, handmade but sturdy, maintained. Someone used this regularly. The bridge was clearly handmade, constructed from thick rope and wooden planks that swayed gently in the breeze. It looked sturdy despite its rustic appearance, the ropes showing signs of regular maintenance and the planks appearing solid rather than rotted. Someone had built this bridge, and more importantly, someone was maintaining it. This was not abandoned wilderness. People came here, lived here, used this crossing regularly enough to keep it functional. The German shepherd led her directly to the near end of the bridge where the rope was secured around the base of an ancient oak with bark so thick and gnarled it looked like elephant skin. The German shepherd crossed first. Jennifer tested the first plank, held firm, gripped both rope railings, stepped on, bridge swayed. She froze, forced herself forward. Don't look down. Eyes ahead. Foot placement. Center of each plank. 1 step, 2 steps, 10 steps. Solid ground. She grabbed the oak tree, steadied herself. The crossing took less than a minute, but felt like an eternity. Every small movement of the bridge sending her heart racing. When she finally stepped off on the solid ground on the far bank, relief flooded through her so intensely that she had to pause and steady herself against the oak tree. The German shepherd stood and immediately began walking again, heading away from the river into forest that looked even more pristine and untouched than the wilderness they had already traversed. On the far side, fresh boot prints in the mud, adult size, multiple prints, recent. Jennifer wasn't alone in this forest anymore. Back at the cabin, the search party arrived to find the structure exactly as Jennifer had left it. Morrison entered the cabin first. Flashlight beams swept across interior. Spotted the hat in the corner. "We've got something." Robert pushed past, grabbed the hat, collapsed to his knees, clutched it to his chest. His son had been here. Daniel was alive, or at least had been alive recently enough to leave this behind. "Sheriff." Frank crouched by the cedar tree. fresh prints, child size, leading away from the cabin, and dog prints. They're together. Morrison keyed his radio. Confirmed trail. Subject heading deeper into wilderness. All units prepare to continue pursuit. The bloodhounds went frantic at the cabin. Picked up Daniel's scent from the hat. Picked up Jennifer's scent from disturbed dust. Both trails leading in the same direction. The handlers struggled to hold them back. The handlers explained that the dogs were now following both paths simultaneously, as mother and son had traveled the same route though separated by time. Robert felt his hopes surge painfully in his chest. Jennifer was following Daniel's trail, which meant she was getting closer to their son with every step. But it also meant she was getting further from safety, further from help, deeper into wilderness that could kill someone who made even a small mistake. The search party reformed and continued forward, moving as rapidly as the terrain and safety concerns allowed. Frank took a position near the front, his knowledge of the area proving invaluable as he recognized landmarks and features that helped orient the group. They crossed the same challenging terrain Jennifer had navigated hours earlier, though with more people and better equipment the obstacles seemed less daunting. Morrison checked the sun position. 3 p.m. Maybe 4 hours of good light left. After that, searching in darkness meant risking more injuries. He made the call. We push hard until sunset. If we don't find them by then, we make camp and resume at dawn. For hours to find Jennifer and Daniel before darkness turned the forest from difficult to deadly. For hours before the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. For hours before hypothermia became the biggest threat. The bridge creaked with each step, ropes groaning under tension. Below, the river roared so loud Jennifer felt a vibration in her chest. One plank had a crack running lengthwise. She stepped over it carefully, feeling it would flex beneath her boot. The forest on the far side of the river possessed a quality that Jennifer could only describe as sacred. The trees grew taller here, their canopy so thick that the forest floor existed in perpetual twilight, even though the sun still shone somewhere high above. Moss covered everything in a carpet of vibrant green that muffled footsteps and gave the entire landscape a dreamlike quality. The air itself felt different, cleaner somehow, carrying scents of cedar and wildflowers that Jennifer could not identify. The German shepherd slowed its pace, paused at a stack of firewood covered with weatherproof tarp, sniffed the air, continued with measured steps. Evidence of habitation. Firewood stacked with tarp. Metal stakes every 20 yards, painted red. Primitive shelter ahead. Fire pit with warm ashes. Sleeping area with fresh pine boughs. Wool blankets folded precisely. Tools hanging from wooden pegs. Empty now. But someone lived here. Someone had created a route through this wilderness, marked it clearly for those who knew what to look for, and maintained it over what must have been years or even decades of consistent effort. The realization sent chills down Jennifer's spine. Who lived out here in such complete isolation? Why had Daniel ended up in their territory? Were these people dangerous, protective of their privacy to the point of hostility toward outsiders? The path led them to a small clearing, where someone had constructed a primitive shelter from logs and bark. The structure was empty but showed signs of recent use. Jennifer stepped inside the shelter, knelt, touched the fire pit stones. Still warm. Someone had been here within hours. Beside the pit lay several flat stones arranged in a circle, perhaps serving as seats for multiple people to gather around the flames. Jennifer approached the shelter cautiously and peered inside, finding a sleeping area lined with fresh pine boughs and several wool blankets folded neatly in one corner. A small collection of tools hung from wooden pegs driven into the wall. Everything spoke of careful organization and regular habitation, yet the shelter sat empty now with no indication of when its occupant might return. The German shepherd did not linger at the shelter, but continued forward immediately, as though this stop was merely one point along a longer journey. Jennifer cast one last look around the clearing before following, her unease growing with each new discovery. More symbols carved into trees as they climbed. Simple slashes, crosses, complex patterns that might be letters in an unknown alphabet. Theodore Brennan's markers? Or someone else's? The symbols varied in design, some simple slashes or crosses, while others formed more complex patterns that might have been letters in an alphabet Jennifer did not recognize. She found herself wondering about Theodore Brennan, the man from the photograph in the cabin. Had he carved these marks? Had he created this entire hidden network of trails and shelters deep in the wilderness? Who lived in these shelters? Were they connected to Theodore Brennan? And why had they let Daniel into their territory without alerting authorities? After another 30 minutes of steady climbing, the path crested a ridge. Jennifer stopped, looked down, forgot to breathe. A circular valley spread before her, ringed by steep hillsides covered in ancient cedars. At the center stood a cluster of buildings arranged in a loose semicircle. Smoke rose from chimneys, gardens, chickens, goats. People moved between structures with purpose. This was not abandoned wilderness. This was a community hidden and thriving. The German shepherd descended the switchback trail. Jennifer followed in a daze. Each step brought the community into sharper focus. Windows, porches, people moving between buildings. This was real. The buildings grew larger and more detailed as she approached. Most appeared to be log cabins similar to the ruined structure she had found earlier, but these were well maintained with solid roofs and glass windows that caught the sunlight. She could see gardens planted behind several of the buildings, vegetable plots carefully tended, and surrounded by low fences to keep out wildlife. Chickens scratched in a fence enclosure near one cabin. A small herd of goats grazed in a meadow at the far edge of the clearing. As Jennifer and the German shepherd emerged from the tree line onto the valley floor, several people stopped what they were doing and turned to watch their approach. People stopped working, turned to watch. Woman in a garden straightened. Man splitting would set down his axe. 2 children froze mid-game. All eyes on Jennifer. Jennifer had never felt more like an intruder in her entire life, walking uninvited into a place that clearly valued its privacy and isolation. The largest cabin's door opened. A man stepped out, 50 years old, gray streaking dark hair, work clothes, weathered features, and the face, the same bone structure from Theodore Brennan's photograph, the same eyes Jennifer saw in her mirror. He wore simple work clothes and boots that had seen years of hard use. But what caught Jennifer's attention most intensely was his face, specifically the bone structure and the shape of his eyes. She had seen those features before in the photograph from the ruined cabin. This man was unmistakably related to Theodore Brennan, carrying the same genetic markers that Jennifer recognized from her own family line. He descended the porch steps slowly and walked toward her with measured deliberation, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp with intelligence and assessment. "You must be Jennifer Mitchell. We've been expecting you. Though Shadow made better time than we anticipated. I'm Marcus Brennan. Your son is safe. He's been with us since Tuesday." His voice was deep and calm, showing no surprise at her sudden appearance. Jennifer opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Jennifer's legs gave out. She saw Marcus moving toward her, saw the ground tilting, then darkness. As Jennifer collapsed, Marcus caught her, lifted her easily, called to Elena, "Prepare the guest cabin, and bring the boy. His mother's here." The valley smelled of wood smoke and baking bread and livestock and cultivated earth. Civilization sent in wilderness's heart. The contradiction made Jennifer's exhausted brain struggle to process reality. Wood smoke, cooking meat, sunlight. Jennifer opened her eyes. Log walls, cotton curtains, thick quilts, unfamiliar bed, a woman in a chair mending. Kind eyes, dark braid, not threatening. "You've been asleep 2 hours. When did you last eat?" Elena set down her mending, handed Jennifer water. "Your son is safe. Marcus is bringing him now." "Daniel? He's here? He's safe?" Words tumbled out. Elena nodded. "He's been with us since Tuesday. Injured but recovering. You'll see for yourself in a moment." Jennifer tried to sit up and found her body protesting with every muscle screaming in exhaustion. The woman moved quickly to help her, propping pillows behind her back and handing her a clay mug filled with cool water. Jennifer drank gratefully, the liquid soothing her parched throat. "My son," she managed to say once she could speak. "Daniel. I need to find Daniel. He's been missing for 5 days, and I followed the dog here because I thought it might lead me to him." The woman's expression softened with understanding and something that looked like relief. "Your son is safe, Jennifer. He has been with us since the day he wandered into the forest. Marcus is bringing him here now so you can see for yourself." Jennifer felt tears spring to her eyes, hot and immediate. Safe. Daniel was safe. The word seemed impossible after 5 days of nightmare uncertainty. 5 days of fearing the worst while desperately hoping for the best. She wanted to leap from the bed and run outside to find her son immediately, but her body refused to cooperate, exhaustion still holding her hostage despite the brief rest. Door opened. Small figure beside Marcus. Daniel. Thinner. Dirty clothes. Uncombed hair. But alive. Moving. His face lit up. Rushed forward. Hit Jennifer's arms with enough force to rock her back. She held him. Breathed him in. Sobbed. Couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. "Mom, I'm okay. I got really lost and super scared, but Marcus and Elena found me and gave me food and a warm bed. And they said they'd help me get home. I'm okay. Promise." His voice muffled against her shoulder. Jennifer pulled back just enough to look at her son's face, checking him over for injuries with hands that trembled. Jennifer checked him over. Healing scrape on forehead. Bruises on arms. Nothing severe. Nothing permanent. He was whole. "Are you hurt? Does anything hurt badly?" Daniel shook his head. "Just some scratches from when I fell down the hill. But Elena put medicine on them, and they feel better now." Jennifer looked up at Marcus and the woman who had been sitting with her, understanding now that this must be Elena. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "Thank you for keeping him safe. I don't understand any of this, but thank you." Marcus pulled up another chair and sat down, his weathered face serious but not unkind. "You deserve answers, and I will provide them as best I can. But first you need to eat something and regain your strength. Elena has prepared food for both you and Daniel. We can talk while you eat." Elena left the room and returned moments later with 2 wooden bowls filled with a thick stew that smelled incredible. She handed one to Jennifer and one to Daniel, along with spoons carved from wood and pieces of fresh bread. Jennifer ate mechanically at first, her mind still struggling to process everything that had happened. But as the warm food hit her empty stomach, hunger took over, and she found herself eating with genuine appetite. Daniel ate beside her, occasionally interjecting comments about his adventure in the forest, his fear when he first got lost gradually transforming into excitement as he described the community and the things he had learned during his time here. Marcus watched them both with an expression that Jennifer found difficult to read, something between satisfaction and sadness mixed with determination. When Jennifer had eaten enough to feel somewhat restored, she set the bowl aside and looked directly at Marcus. Elena brought wooden bowls filled with venison stew, hand-carved spoons, fresh bread. As Jennifer ate, she noticed Elena wore a silver pendant, 3 vertical lines crossed by 1 horizontal, the same symbol carved on trees throughout the forest. "Tell me who you are and why my son ended up here instead of being taken immediately to the authorities. Tell me why you live out here, completely hidden from the world. Tell me everything, because I need to understand what has happened." Marcus nodded slowly, as though he had been preparing for this conversation since the moment Jennifer appeared in the valley. "That is fair. You have every right to demand answers. But what I am about to tell you will sound strange, perhaps even unbelievable. I ask only that you listen to the full story before making judgments." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the settlement visible beyond. This community started in 1947. Your great-great-great-uncle Theodore Brennan founded it. He wanted to preserve wilderness and restore human connection to nature. My grandfather, then my father, now me, 70 years of guardians protecting this valley. Theodore was a man who saw the world changing after the war, saw the wilderness shrinking and wildlife disappearing, and decided to dedicate his life to preserving a piece of what he believed was sacred. He purchased this land legally and established a sanctuary where animals could live protected from hunters and trappers. But more than that, Theodore believed that humans had lost their connection to the natural world, and he wanted to create a place where that connection could be restored and maintained. Marcus turned back to face Jennifer, his expression intense with conviction. Theodore was my grandfather. When he grew too old to maintain this place alone, my father joined him. When my father passed, the responsibility fell to me. We are guardians of this valley and the wilderness surrounding it. We live simply and apart from modern society by choice, maintaining the traditions Theodore established decades ago. And central to those traditions is our relationship with the animals that share this land, particularly the dogs that serve as our partners and companions in protecting the forest. Jennifer made eye contact with Marcus and gave a small nod of understanding. "Tell me what happened," she said, turning to Daniel. The boy shifted against her side and began explaining how he had chased a soccer ball through the gate and followed a deer too far into the forest, getting lost when darkness fell and tumbling down a ravine where Marcus and Elena had found him. Marcus returned to his chair and continued speaking, his voice carrying the weight of history and responsibility. "The German shepherd that led you here is Shadow. She's descended from Scout, Theodore's original dog. We trained them for intelligence work, protecting the forest, guiding when guidance is needed. Shadow knew Daniel was here. She decided bringing you directly was better than us emerging with a lost child and facing questions that might expose us. Theodore believed certain dogs possess intelligence beyond instinct. Scout, his German shepherd, could understand human emotion and intention in ways that seemed supernatural. He spent years developing that partnership. That partnership became the foundation for everything we do here." Jennifer listened with growing fascination, one arm still wrapped protectively around Daniel, who had curled up against her side. Marcus nodded slowly. "Shadow knew Daniel was here from the moment Elena and I found him in the forest 5 days ago. Dogs like Shadow serve as our eyes and ears throughout the wilderness. When we discovered your son injured at the bottom of a ravine, Shadow was with us. She watched as we brought him back here, treated his wounds, and kept him safe while we decided how to contact his family without exposing our community to unwanted attention. Shadow took it upon herself to solve that problem by going to your home and bringing you here directly. It is what her ancestors have done for 70 years whenever the situation required human intervention that we could not provide ourselves." Elena spoke from where she stood near the window. "We would have brought Daniel out ourselves within days. But questions would follow. Investigations. Pressure to integrate into society, we chose to leave. Shadow found a better solution. Let you see Daniel was safe. Let you understand us before judging us. We never intended to keep him from his family, but these situations are always delicate for us. We live here by choice, maintaining a way of life that most people would consider strange or even dangerous. If we appeared suddenly with a lost child, there would be questions, investigations, perhaps attempt to force us to leave our home and integrate into society we have deliberately chosen to leave behind. Shadow found a better solution by bringing you here, so you could see for yourself that Daniel was safe and well cared for." Jennifer looked at Daniel curled against her side, at Marcus and Elena, who'd fed and sheltered him, at the cabin that spoke of care and competence. Anger wouldn't come, only gratitude. Marcus paused and glanced toward Elena, then continued. "Theodore was a man who saw the world changing after the war. He watched wilderness shrinking, wildlife disappearing, and decided to dedicate his life to preserving what he believed was sacred. He purchased this land legally and established a sanctuary where nature could be protected." Jennifer shifted forward slightly, her attention fully focused on his words as she processed the weight of what he was describing. "When Theodore grew too old to maintain this place alone," Marcus said, "my father joined him. When my father passed, the responsibility fell to me. We've been guardians of this valley for 70 years now, maintaining the traditions Theodore established and protecting the wilderness that surrounds us." Daniel shifted against her side, his voice taking on the slightly embarrassed tone of a child admitting to a mistake. "I was playing in the backyard, and the soccer ball went through the gate. I knew I was not supposed to go into the forest, but I thought I would just grab the ball really quick and come right back. But when I went to get it, I saw a deer standing between the trees, and I wanted to get closer to see it better. I followed it for a while, and then I realized I did not know which way was home anymore." He continued with the unself-conscious detail typical of children recounting events. He had tried to retrace his steps, but only got more confused and disoriented. As daylight began to fade, panic had set in, and he had started running, trying desperately to find something familiar. That was when it slipped on loose rocks at the top of the steep slope and tumbled down into a ravine, hitting his head on a tree and scraping his arms badly in the fall. He had lain there crying and scared as darkness fell completely, certain he was going to die alone in the forest. Then he had heard voices calling his name and seen lights approaching through the trees. Elena and I were patrolling when Shadow alerted us. Found Daniel at the bottom of a ravine after sunset, injured, terrified, conscious. We made the call. Bring him here immediately rather than risk navigating in darkness with an injured child. By morning he'd improved. That's when we started planning how to return him without compromising our community. Marcus picked up the narrative from there. Elena and I were conducting one of our regular patrols through the outer sections of our territory when Shadow alerted us to something unusual. We found Daniel at the bottom of the ravine just after sunset, injured and terrified but conscious and able to communicate. We made the decision to bring him back here immediately rather than try to navigate through the forest in darkness while carrying an injured child. The risk of causing further harm seemed too great. We treated his wounds, gave him food and water, and let him sleep. By morning he was much improved, and that was when we began discussing how to return him to his family without compromising our community. Jennifer felt Daniel relax against her as Marcus confirmed the story, validating the boy's memory of events. She stroked his hair absently while thinking about everything she had learned. A hidden community living deliberately apart from modern society, maintaining traditions established by her own distant ancestor, partnering with specially trained dogs to protect the wilderness they called home. It all seemed impossible. Yet here she sat in the middle of it with her son safe beside her and clear evidence all around that this isolated settlement existed and functioned exactly as Marcus described. Your son told us his mother's maiden name was Brennan. We checked our records. You descend from Theodore's brother, who left the mountains in 1920. That makes you family. That's why we're showing you this place. Family has a right to know what their ancestor built. Why reveal yourselves at all? Why not just hand Daniel over somewhere neutral? Jennifer asked. Marcus exchanged a glance with Elena before responding. Because you are family, Jennifer. The blood that ran in Theodore's veins runs in yours as well. You have a right to know about this place and what your ancestor created. More than that, we believe you can be trusted with the knowledge because you understand what it means to fight for something you love. You spent 5 days searching desperately for your son when others might have given up hope. That determination and loyalty is the same quality Theodore possessed, the same quality that built this community and has sustained it for 7 decades. But what did being family mean to Marcus? What obligations came with this knowledge? And what would happen when the search party found them, which, based on the distant sounds of barking dogs, would be any minute now? Jennifer touched her own face, tracing the cheekbone she'd inherited from her mother, who'd inherited it from her father, who'd inherited it from Theodore Brennan, the bone structure Marcus carried. She'd been looking at family, without knowing it. Voices, dogs barking, distant but closing. Marcus stood. Elena moved to the window. The search party found us. Her voice carried resignation. Marcus's jaw tightened. That will be my husband, the sheriff, half of Pinecrest Valley. Jennifer stood despite exhaustion. Marcus turned to her. What you tell them determines our future. 70 years of isolation, because few know we exist. If word spreads, we face pressure from authorities, developers, curiosity seekers. We're asking you to protect our secret. The request settled onto Jennifer's shoulders like stone. Marcus wanted her to lie. To her husband. To law enforcement. To protect people she'd known for 2 hours. People who'd saved her son. Mom, they're nice people. Marcus taught me animal tracks. Elena showed me plants you can eat. They didn't hurt me. I don't want them in trouble because of me. Daniel looked up at her with worry creasing his young face. His words carried a child's simple moral clarity that cut through Jennifer's confusion. These people had indeed been kind to her son when they could have chosen differently. They deserved consideration and protection if she could provide it without compromising her own integrity. Marcus moved to the door. I'll meet them. Explain we found you both and provided care. What happens next depends on how you characterize our actions. He paused. Look back. Hoped she understood. Then stepped outside. Jennifer followed with Daniel. Robert spotted her. Ran. Covered the distance in seconds. Swept them both into his arms with crushing force. Nearly knocked him over. He was crying openly, body shaking. I thought I'd lost you both. Thought the forest took you both. He was crying openly, his body shaking with relief and residual fear as he held his family close. I thought I had lost you both, he said between sobs. I thought the forest had taken you, and I would never see you again. Jennifer held him tightly, feeling her own tears flow freely as the trauma of the past 5 days finally found release in this moment of reunion. Morrison approached slowly, eyes scanning the settlement, taking in cabins, gardens, people emerging to watch. His hand rested on his radio, but didn't key it. He was calculating, processing, deciding. Behind him came Deputy Chun, Frank the volunteer, and at least 10 other searchers, all staring at the collection cabins and the people who were emerging from them to watch this unexpected intrusion into their isolated world. Morrison's hand rested on his radio, but he did not immediately call for backup or take any official action. Instead, he looked from the settlement to Marcus to Jennifer with an expression that suggested he was calculating various factors and trying to determine the appropriate response to this highly unusual situation. Marcus Brennan. My family owns this land legally. 3 generations. We found the boy injured Tuesday. Cared for him. Were planning his return when his mother arrived. We meant no harm. Broke no laws. The child was fed, sheltered, respected throughout. Marcus stepped forward with his hands visible and non-threatening, positioning himself between the community and the newcomers. His voice carried calm authority, despite the tension evident in his posture. You found a missing child and didn't contact authorities? Kept him 5 days while his parents suffered? You understand how that looks. Morrison's tone measured, professional, but his hand stayed away from his radio. He was listening. Sheriff Morrison studied Marcus for a long moment before responding. His tone was measured but firm, walking the line between professional duty and acknowledgement that the situation appeared more complex than simple criminal negligence. Morrison's eyes tracked the settlement. Well-maintained buildings, organized gardens, people who carried themselves with dignity, not desperation. This wasn't a cult or a criminal hideout. This was something else entirely. Something he'd never encountered in 30 years of law enforcement. Marcus met the sheriff's gaze steadily. I understand your concern, Sheriff. I can only say that our intentions were good, and the child was never in danger while under our care. Jennifer Mitchell can confirm that her son has been treated well, and that we were making arrangements to return him when circumstances allowed. Silence. Every eye on Jennifer. Robert's arm still around her. Daniel between them. Marcus waiting. Morrison waiting. The community watching. Her next words would determine everything. The bloodhounds strained at their leashes, baying continuously, confused by multiple scents converging in one location. Behind Morrison, Frank stood with mouth open, staring at the settlement he believed was abandoned ruins. Reality and expectation colliding. Sheriff Morrison, everything Marcus told you is true. When Daniel fell injured, Marcus and Elena made the responsible decision to stabilize him here rather than risk further injury transporting him through dangerous terrain at night. They treated his wounds, fed him, kept him safe. From what Daniels told me, they were actively planning his return when I arrived this morning. She paused and looked directly at Sheriff Morrison, willing him to understand the deeper message beneath her words. I know this situation doesn't fit standard procedures, but sometimes good people do good things in unconventional ways. I'm asking you to recognize that rather than punish them for not following protocols when the outcome was my son returned safe and healthy. Robert squeezed her shoulder gently, a gesture of support even though she knew he must have dozens of questions about what had happened and where exactly they were standing right now. Morrison removed his hat, ran one hand through gray hair. 30 years in law enforcement. He developed instincts about people. He looked at Daniel, healing scrapes, adequately cared for. looked at Marcus and Elena, dignity, calm, not defensive anxiety. Looked at the settlement, long-term planning, stable community, nothing temporary or suspicious. He had been in law enforcement for 30 years and had developed instincts about people and situations that went beyond what any manual or regulation could teach. He looked at Daniel, noting the healing scrapes and the general appearance of a child who had been adequately cared for despite obvious outdoor living conditions. He looked at Marcus and Elena, seeing people who carried themselves with dignity and calm rather than the defensive anxiety of those with something genuinely criminal to hide. He looked at the settlement spread across the valley, taking in the well-maintained buildings and organized gardens that spoke to long-term planning and stable community, rather than anything temporary or suspicious. How long has the settlement existed? My grandfather established it in 1947 on legally purchased land. We've maintained continuous residence, paying property taxes, complying with all legal requirements. We choose privacy and traditional living over modern convenience. No law against that. Chin stepped forward, notebook open, ready to document. Morrison held up one hand. Put away, Marcus. Chin looked surprised. Complied. Closed the notebook. Morrison turned to Jennifer and Robert. Morrison nodded slowly, processing his information and calculating his next steps carefully. Deputy Chin stepped forward with his notebook open, clearly prepared to document everything for an official report. Morrison held up one hand to stop him, a gesture that carried clear meaning about the direction the situation was going to take. Put the notebook away, Marcus. I think we can handle this informally given the circumstances. Chin looked surprised but complied immediately, closing the notebook and returning it to his pocket. Morrison turned his attention back to Jennifer and Robert. I need to examine Daniel to confirm he has no serious injuries and to document his general condition for my report. After that, assuming everything checks out as you have described, I see no reason why you cannot take your son home immediately. Relief flooded through Jennifer so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled again. Robert caught her and held her steady while Morrison crouched to Daniel's level. Asked gentle questions. Where did it hurt? What happened while lost? Daniel answered honestly. Described his fall, his fear, Marcus and Elena's kindness. No signs of trauma beyond normal separation, upset. No indications of mistreatment. The scrapes were properly treated. Morrison crouched down to Daniel's eye level and began asking him gentle questions about where he hurt and what had happened during his time lost in the forest. Daniel answered honestly, describing his fall and his fear and the kindness Marcus and Elena had shown him. The boy showed no signs of trauma beyond the normal upset of being separated from his parents, no indications of mistreatment or neglect that would require official intervention. Morrison examined the scrapes and bruises, noting that they had been properly cleaned and treated with appropriate care. When Morrison stood up again, his expression had softened considerably from the stern professional mask he had worn initially. You folks did right by this boy. That counts for something substantial. I'll file a report stating Daniel was found sheltered by private individuals on their property after injuries from a fall. He received appropriate care. Returned to parents in good health. I won't include specific location details beyond general wilderness area. No charges recommended given positive outcome, and lack of criminal intent. He looked pointedly at Marcus. If anything similar happens again, you contact authorities immediately. Multiple days delayed contact means lives disrupted and significant resources expended searching. That cannot happen again. Marcus inclined his head. You have my word, Sheriff. Better communication protocols if similar situations arise, though we hope nothing like this occurs again. Pack up, head back before we lose daylight. The Mitchells come with us. This search concluded successfully. He turned to Frank and the volunteers who'd witnessed everything. This stays quiet. These people have a right to privacy. Understood. Nods all around. Morrison seemed satisfied with that response. He turned to Frank and the other volunteers who had been standing quietly throughout this exchange, witnessing everything but saying nothing. Let us pack up and head back before we lose daylight. The Mitchells and their son will be coming with us. This search has concluded successfully, which is the outcome we all hoped for from the beginning. The volunteers began reorganizing their equipment and preparing for the return journey through the forest. Jennifer approached Marcus and Elena, kept her voice low. "Thank you for everything. I'll keep your secret. I'll make sure Robert understands the importance of discretion." Marcus clasped her hand. "You're always welcome here, Jennifer. You and your family. Remember, you have roots here through Theodore. That connection remains valid whenever you need it." As they parted, Marcus handed Jennifer a small wooden token carved with a 3-line symbol. "If you ever need to find us again, show this to Shadow or any of our dogs. They'll guide you home." Home. He called this place home. Jennifer realized he meant it as her home, too. Morrison watched Jennifer with Daniel pressed against her side, Robert's arms around both. He'd worked missing children cases for 30 years. Some ended in horror. Some ended in miracles. This was a miracle, delivered by unconventional means. He could live with that. The return journey felt entirely different. Jennifer walked between Robert and Daniel, one hand in Robert's grip, other hand on Daniel's shoulder. Not desperate chase, not frantic search. Family whole, moving together. She walked between Robert and Daniel, one hand clasped in her husband's grip and the other resting protectively on her son's shoulder. The search party moved as a cohesive group now rather than the urgent scatter formation they had maintained during pursuit. Morrison led with Frank navigating. Chin brought up rear, marking trees with fluorescent tape every 50 yards. The search party moved as cohesive unit now. Urgency replaced by satisfaction. Mission accomplished. Sheriff Morrison led from the front alongside Frank, whose knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable in selecting the easiest route back toward civilization. Deputy Chin brought up the rear, occasionally stopping to mark trees with fluorescent tape, so that the path could be easily retraced if necessary for any follow-up activities. "Tell me what happened." Robert's voice quiet. Jennifer explained carefully. The ruined cabin, Daniel's hat, Theodore Brennan's photograph, the family connection, the maintained trail, the bridge, the community, private individuals who value isolation and traditional skills. She chose words carefully, protected what needed protecting. Robert had listened quietly as Jennifer explained the basics of what had happened during her hours following Shadow through the wilderness. She told him about finding the ruined cabin and discovering Daniel's hat, about the photograph of Theodore Brennan and the family connection she had uncovered, about the maintained bridge and trail markers that had led her deeper into the forest. She spoke carefully about the community, describing them as private individuals who valued isolation and traditional living skills rather than dwelling on the full extent of their hidden society. Robert absorbed this information with the expression of someone processing multiple layers of shock and relief simultaneously, too emotionally exhausted to interrogate the details deeply. Daniel walked between them with new confidence, pointed out animal tracks, identified edible plants. "Marcus taught me this. Elena showed me that." Pride in his voice. He'd survived something terrible, been cared for by strangers, learned skills that would stay with him forever. Daniel walked between his parents with newfound confidence despite his ordeal. The fear and panic that characterized the early hours of his disappearance had been replaced by a kind of quiet pride in having survived something difficult. He talked about what he had learned during his time with Marcus and Elena, pointing out animal tracks along the trail and identifying edible plants growing near the path. Jennifer and Robert exchanged glances over his head, silently acknowledging that their son had been changed by this experience in ways both subtle and profound. He had faced genuine danger and survived. He had been cared for by strangers who became temporary guardians. He had learned skills and gained knowledge that would stay with him for the rest of his life. They crossed a bridge in small batches. Structure swayed but held firm. Several volunteers expressed surprise at finding well-maintained construction this deep in wilderness. Morrison deflected questions smoothly. Probably hunters or trappers from decades past. Jennifer caught his eye, nodded thanks for maintaining discretion. The group crossed a rope bridge in small batches, the structure swaying gently under their combined weight, but holding firm exactly as it had during Jennifer's initial crossing. Several of the volunteers expressed surprise at finding such a well-maintained construction this deep in the wilderness, asking questions about who had built it and how long it had been there. Sheriff Morrison deflected these inquiries smoothly, suggesting it was probably the work of hunters or trappers from decades past who had needed reliable access across the river. Jennifer caught his eye and nodded slightly in acknowledgement of his willingness to maintain the discretion he had promised back in the valley. Jennifer searched for Shadow as they walked, half expected the German shepherd to reappear, guide them home as she guided Jennifer to the settlement. But Shadow remained absent. Task complete. Daniel reunited with family. No further guidance needed. As they retraced the path Jennifer had followed that morning, she found herself looking for Shadow, half expecting the German shepherd to materialize from the forest to guide them home just as she had guided Jennifer to the settlement. But the dog remained absent, her task apparently complete now that Daniel had been reunited with his family. The thought left her with an unexpected sense of loss, as though saying goodbye to a friend she had only just begun to know. They reached the old cabin as afternoon sun descended. Jennifer paused at the threshold, looked once more at the place where she found first evidence Daniel had survived. Theodore Brennan had lived here before moving deeper into wilderness, before establishing the community that now thrived in secret. What would he think of her decision to protect it? Robert squeezed her hand. We should keep moving. Home before dark. Jennifer nodded. They continued forward, left the cabin to its slow dissolution back into forest. They reached the old cabin as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows of trees and painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Jennifer paused at the threshold, looking once more at the place where she had first found concrete evidence that Daniel had survived. The cabin seemed even more decrepit in the fading light, a remnant of time long past when Theodore Brennan had lived here before moving deeper into the wilderness to establish the community that now thrived in secret. She thought about her distant ancestor and the legacy he had created, wondering what he would think of her decision to protect the settlement from exposure and unwanted scrutiny. Robert noticed her hesitation and squeezed her hand gently. We should keep moving if we want to get home before dark, he said quietly. Jennifer nodded, and they continued forward, leaving the cabin behind continued slow dissolution back into the forest that surrounded it. The volunteers maintained a steady pace that ate up the miles efficiently, their earlier urgency replaced by the satisfaction of a successful mission completed. Conversation flowed more easily now, people sharing stories and observations about the search effort and expressing relief that everything had ended well despite the unusual circumstances of the resolution. They emerged from forest onto the Mitchell property at twilight, first stars visible in darkening sky, house lights glowing warm and welcoming. Safety, normalcy. After strangeness of the past hours, home looked like salvation. By the time they emerged from the forest onto the Mitchell property, twilight had settled across the valley, and the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky. The house looked warm and welcoming with lights glowing in the windows, a beacon of safety and normalcy after the strangeness of the past hours. News vans sprang into action. Reporters rushed forward with cameras and microphones. Morrison intercepted them, held up both hands. The child has been found safe. Returned to parents. Minor injuries. Good health. Family requests privacy. More detailed statement tomorrow morning at the department. Until then, respect the Mitchell family's need for space. News vans that had been camped at the end of their driveway for days immediately sprang into action when they spotted a returning group. Reporters rushing forward with cameras and microphones extended. Sheriff Morrison intercepted them before they could reach the family, holding up both hands to establish boundaries and control the situation. The child has been found safe and is being returned to his parents, Morrison announced in his official capacity. He sustained minor injuries from a fall, but has been adequately cared for and is in good health. The family requests privacy at this time to reunite and recover from this ordeal. I will provide a more detailed statement tomorrow morning at the department. Until then, I ask that you respect the Mitchell family's need for space and time. The reporters shouted questions anyway, but Morrison stood firm, physically blocking their access to Jennifer, Robert, and Daniel, while his deputies escorted the family toward their front door. Inside, familiar surroundings reasserted reality in waves. The empty haunted house during Daniel's absence now felt alive again with his presence. Robert guided Daniel upstairs for bath and clean clothes. Jennifer collapsed on the living room couch, body finally acknowledging exhaustion. Inside the house, Jennifer felt reality reassert itself in waves. The familiar surroundings that had seemed so empty and haunted during Daniel's absence now felt alive again with his presence. Robert guided their son upstairs for a proper bath and clean clothes while Jennifer collapsed onto the living room couch, her body finally acknowledging the full extent of its exhaustion. Jennifer closed her eyes, saw a shadow sitting on the lawn with intelligent eyes fixed on a window, the image that had started everything. She opened her eyes. The lawn was empty and dark. No sign of the mysterious guide who had made everything possible. She closed her eyes for just a moment and immediately saw a shadow sitting on the lawn with those intelligent eyes fixed on the window, initiating the chain of events that had led to this resolution. When she opened her eyes again, the lawn was empty and dark, showing no sign of the mysterious guide who had made everything possible. Crossing from forest to yard felt like crossing from one world to another. Forest air, pine and cedar and earth. Yard air, cut grass and gasoline from a mower, and the lingering scent of the search team's coffee. Civilization smell after wilderness's purity. 3 weeks passed. Daniel returned to school with edited story. Got lost, sheltered by kind people, found his way home. No mention of hidden community. School counselor met with him twice. Found him remarkably resilient. Jennifer and Robert attended sessions together. Privately marveled at their son's strength. 3 weeks of readjustment and recovery that felt both endless and impossibly brief. Daniel returned to school with a story carefully edited to exclude any mention of the hidden community, telling his friends and teachers simply that he had gotten lost and been sheltered by kind people who would help him find his way home. The school counselor met with him twice to assess any psychological trauma from the ordeal, finding him remarkably resilient and well-adjusted given the circumstances. Jennifer and Robert attended those sessions together, presenting a united front of supportive parenting while privately marveling at their son's strength and adaptability. Media attention faded as other stories captured public interest. Sheriff Morrison kept his promise. Filed paperwork mentioning private individuals without specific locations or identifying information. No sensational headlines about hidden communities. The secret remained protected. The media attention faded gradually as other stories captured public interest, and the Mitchell family returned to something resembling normal life. Sheriff Morrison kept his promise about the official report, filing paperwork that mentioned private individuals on their own property, without providing specific locations or identifying information that might lead curious parties to search for the settlement. Jennifer checked the news daily during those first weeks, half expecting to see sensational headlines about a hidden community discovered in the Appalachian wilderness, but no such stories appeared. The secret remained protected by the handful of people who had witnessed it and chosen to honor the privacy Marcus and his community valued so deeply. Jennifer thought about the valley often. Marcus and Elena tending gardens. Community members living by principles Theodore Brennan established decades before she was born. Most of all, she thought about Shadow and the inexplicable intelligence the German shepherd had demonstrated. Jennifer found herself thinking about the valley often during those weeks of recovery. She thought about Marcus and Elena going about their daily routines, tending gardens and maintaining structures, and living according to principles established by Theodore Brennan decades before she was born. She thought about the other community members she had glimpsed briefly, the children playing near the cabins and the adults working with quiet purpose. Most of all, she thought about Shadow and the inexplicable intelligence the German shepherd had demonstrated, the seemingly impossible ability to understand what Jennifer needed and to provide exactly that guidance at exactly the right moment. Saturday morning 4 weeks after Daniel's return, Jennifer stood at the kitchen window with coffee, watched sunrise paint the forest pink and gold. Daniel played in the backyard under Robert's supervision, both more cautious about boundaries but also more relaxed. They'd survived something terrible, emerged stronger. On a Saturday morning 4 weeks after Daniel's return, Jennifer stood at the kitchen window with her coffee, watching the sunrise paint the forest in shades of pink and gold. Daniel played in the backyard under Robert's supervision, both of them more cautious now about boundaries and rules, but also more relaxed in the knowledge that their family had survived something terrible and emerged stronger for the experience. Movement at the tree line. Jennifer's heart skipped. A dog emerged from shadows. Not Shadow. Different. Younger. Smaller. Also a German shepherd, but with different markings. Darker facial features. Almost wolfish appearance. Amber eyes standing out prominently. Movement at the tree line caught Jennifer's attention, and her heart skipped a beat as a dog emerged from the shadows between the pines. For a moment, she thought it was Shadow returning for another visit, but as the animal moved closer, she realized this was a different dog, younger and smaller than the German shepherd that had guided her through the wilderness. The new dog sat on the lawn, almost exact spot where Shadow had positioned herself during desperate mornings of searching. Looked directly at the kitchen window. Same uncanny focus, seeing through glass and walls to the person within. The new dog was also a German shepherd, but with markings that differed from Shadow's distinctive pattern. This one had darker facial features, giving it an almost wolfish appearance that made its amber eyes stand out even more prominently. The dog sat down on a lawn in almost the exact spot where Shadow had positioned herself during those desperate mornings of searching, and it looked directly at the kitchen window with that same uncanny focus that seemed to see through glass and walls to the person standing within. Jennifer set down her coffee and moved toward the back door, drawn by curiosity and something deeper that she could not quite name. Daniel noticed the dog, started toward it with fearless enthusiasm. Robert called a warning. The German shepherd remained still as Daniel approached. No aggression, no fear. Daniel stopped a few feet away, extended his hand, spoke gently. The dog sniffed his hand, stood, walked toward the forest, turned back, looked at Daniel with clear expectation. Daniel noticed the dog immediately and started toward it with a fearless enthusiasm typical of children who loved animals. Robert called out a warning to be careful, but the German shepherd remained perfectly still as Daniel approached, showing no signs of aggression or fear. The boy stopped a few feet away and extended his hand slowly, speaking in the gentle voice Jennifer had taught him to use with unfamiliar animals. The dog sniffed his hand briefly, then stood and walked a few paces toward the forest before turning back to look at Daniel with clear expectation. Jennifer recognized the gesture immediately, that same purposeful movement Shadow had used to indicate she wanted to be followed. "Daniel, come here." Jennifer stepped onto the porch. Daniel obeyed reluctantly, looked back at the dog with obvious disappointment. Robert joined them, put a protective hand on Daniel's shoulder, watched the German shepherd with wariness born from recent experience. Jennifer stepped out onto the porch and called Daniel back to her side. The boy obeyed reluctantly, looking back at the dog with obvious disappointment at having their interaction cut short. Robert joined them on the porch, putting a protective hand on Daniel's shoulder while watching the German shepherd with wariness born from recent experience. The dog sat when Daniel returned to his parents, attention shifting from boy to Jennifer, intensity making her skin prickle. Not random stray. Another guardian sent from the valley, another connection to the community that had saved her son. The dog sat down again when Daniel returned to his parents, its attention shifting from the boy to Jennifer with an intensity that made her skin prickle with recognition. This was not a random stray wandering through their property. This was another guardian sent from the valley, another connection to the community that had saved her son and changed her understanding of what was possible in the hidden places of the world. "That's one of them?" Robert's voice carried no judgment, simple acknowledgement. Jennifer nodded. "Shadow must have sent a successor, or Marcus did. Reminder that the connection continues, that Theodore's guardianship extends to us now. That's one of them, isn't it?" Robert asked quietly, his voice carrying no judgment but simple acknowledgement of what they both understood. Jennifer nodded slowly without taking her eyes off the German shepherd. "I think Shadow must have sent a successor, or perhaps Marcus did. A reminder that the connection between our families continues, that the guardianship Theodore established extends to us now, whether we fully understand it or not." The dog watched them another long moment, stood, walked back toward tree line with unhurried grace. At the forest edge, paused, looked back one final time, disappeared into shadows, left behind questions and a profound sense they were being watched over by forces both ancient and protective. The dog watched them for another long moment, then stood and walked back toward the tree line with unhurried grace. At the forest's edge it paused and looked back one final time before disappearing into the shadows between the pines, leaving behind only questions and a profound sense that Jennifer's family was being watched over by forces both ancient and protective. "Will I see Marcus and Elena again someday?" Daniel tugged her sleeve, eyes full of wonder. Jennifer knelt to his level, brushed his hair back. "Sometimes we encounter people and places that change us. Those encounters create connections that last even when we're separated. The community helped you. We'll always be grateful. Whether you see them again depends on many things. But I believe they'll always be out there, protecting the wilderness they call home." Daniel tugged on Jennifer's sleeve, looking up at her with eyes full of wonder. "Do you think I'll see Marcus and Elena again someday?" he asked. Jennifer knelt down to his level and brushed his hair back from his forehead, considering how to answer that question honestly while maintaining the discretion she had promised. "I think that sometimes we encounter people and places that change us in important ways, and those encounters create connections that last even when we're physically separated. The community helped you when you needed help, and we'll always be grateful for that. Whether you see them again depends on many things I can't predict. But I believe they'll always be out there in the forest, living according to their values and protecting the wilderness they call home." She stood, wrapped arm around Daniel's shoulders. Robert did the same from the other side. 3 of them united in shared experience and secrets they'd carry forward together. She stood and wrapped her arm around Daniel's shoulders, feeling Robert do the same from the other side. The 3 of them united in their shared experience and the secrets they would carry forward together. The forest stretched before them vast and mysterious, holding within its depths both danger and salvation, both isolation and community, both a known world and places that existed beyond the boundaries of ordinary life. Jennifer understood now that being lost was sometimes the first step toward finding what truly mattered, and that family took many forms, including the unexpected guardians who appeared when hope seemed most fragile. Jennifer raised her coffee cup toward the trees, silent toast acknowledging the watchers and watched, guardians and protected, the ancient legacy connecting her to Theodore Brennan and the Hidden Valley. Then she turned, guided her family inside to warmth and safety, carrying knowledge that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, some secrets were protecting, some connections transcending explanation. The German shepherd was gone but not forgotten, and Jennifer knew with absolute certainty that when her family needed guidance again, the forest would provide it through whatever form was necessary. She raised her coffee cup in a silent toast toward the trees, acknowledging the watchers and the watched, the guardians and protected, the ancient legacy that connected her to Theodore Brennan and the Hidden Valley where his descendants still lived according to principles most of the world had long forgotten. Then she turned and guided her family back inside to the warmth and safety of their home, carrying with her the knowledge that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, some secrets were worth protecting, and some connections transcended explanation to exist in a realm of trust and gratitude that required no words to validate their truth. On the kitchen counter, Jennifer found a small carved wooden dog she didn't remember placing there. German shepherd, perfect detail, a gift from the valley, a reminder. She picked it up, placed it on the windowsill where she could see it every morning, where it could watch over them the way Shadow had, the way the forest would, always. Jennifer understood in that moment that being found wasn't the end of the story. It was a beginning. They'd been adopted by something older than civilization, claimed by guardians who took their responsibilities seriously. The forest had given Daniel back. Now the forest watched to ensure he stayed safe. She found that thought comforting rather than frightening. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.